In this poll season, who is paying for the party? There's a crying need for transparency in political funding, but do political parties actually want that? The Association for Democratic Reforms, which is a think tank, has come up with a report that says more than 50% of funds of political parties come from unknown sources. So what are these sources? Well, prominent among them are voluntary donations of up to 20,000 rupees and donations that are made through electoral bonds. In both these cases, the donor information is either kept secret or is not required to be revealed. There are a bunch of petitions in the Supreme Court now on this issue of political funding, which the court today posted for hearing on the 2nd of April. One of the petitions by the Association for Democratic Reforms, or ADR, seeks a stay on the electoral bond scheme in particular. So what are these bonds? Well, they can basically be bought by anyone from notified banks in multiples of 1,000, 10,000, 1 lakh, 10 lakh, up to 1 crore. They can then be given to the political party of choice. Parties need to redeem these bonds within 15 days. Now, here's the tricky part. The buyer information is kept confidential. It's only known to the bank. Critics, however, argue that this is an obscure funding system, but the government insists it promotes transparency. Critics object to the fact that donor information is kept confidential, but the government argues that it is an extension of the right to vote in a secret ballot. The question we're asking tonight is whether our political funding system needs to be completely overhauled, whether political parties want to do that, and how can we ensure greater transparency in the way our elections are funded. We have Jagdeep Chokar, who's a founding member of the Association for Democratic Reforms that has done so much work on this issue, joining us tonight. Mohammad Khan of the Congress here in the studio with us will be joined shortly by the former Chief Election Commissioner of India, Naveen Chawla, and Bhaskar Ghosh of the BJP. Mr. Chokar, to you first. Just, explain to us, when the government says that, this lack of transparency on who is actually giving money to parties through electoral bonds, it's just an extension of the secret ballot system. Why is it that that argument doesn't actually hold?
You see, this is not a ballot, first of all, this is money. And on the one hand, the finance minister said in his budget speech that this will bring transparency to electoral and political financing. Now, if transparency means secret ballot, then I don't know what to say. At the same time, the name of the donor is unknown. Political party will not know, at least theoretically, who has given the money. So neither the donor nor the receiver are known. The information will be available only with the State Bank of India, and it is said that the State Bank of India will not share this information with anyone. So the question arises, if information is not to be shared with anyone, why collect it?
Right.
Number two, if the information is with the State Bank, it is likely to be available to the Reserve Bank and to the Finance Ministry, and therefore to the party in power. There was an apprehension that this would choke flow of money to opposition parties, which has been proved right, because in 2017-18, 95% of the electoral bond donations have gone to the ruling party. In addition, the introduction of electoral bonds has also removed the limit of 7.5% of the profits that a company could donate to political parties. Now it is possible for a company to donate 100% of its profits to the political parties.
So actually you're saying that instead of greater transparency, we actually have far less transparency with electoral bonds. That's what you're saying.
No, it is now, no, there is nothing called far less transparency. There is complete opacity. Nobody is any wiser who is giving how much money to whom except the government of the day.
So let me take this to Mohammad Khan of the Congress here.
Just a minute, the way these bonds were brought into being through a money bill is also unconstitutional. They are not a money bill provision under the constitution of the country. So there are many things wrong with this.
Okay, so I want to take that to Mohammad Khan of the Congress. Is the Congress in favor of doing away with these bonds? What is your position on it officially?
Absolutely. In fact, on the 3rd of January 2018, our chief spokesperson, Mr. Randeep Singh Surjewala, after this bond scheme had been announced, came out and said to the public that we stand against this. This is a regressive scheme. it will obfuscate transparency, and it takes us back several years. We have maintained that position consistently.
You only got what, 5% of money through
that doesn't matter,
from electoral bonds, right?
No,
compared to the BJP's 95%.
Actually, 5%, not just us. Every single political
party
party,
together,
yes, all of us together. But it's not about the percentage that we have received. In fact, we have, on channels such as yours, put out a challenge to the BJP as well. We've said, why don't you disclose to the people of India who it is that has donated to the Congress party? Because you're in possession of this information. We aren't, you aren't, but the government is. So why don't you declare it to the public as to who's donated to the Congress? And in doing so, also declare who has donated to you. Because I'll tell you, Nidhi, let me give you by way of an illustration why this is a regressive system. Because it promotes quid pro quo. Before I say that, I also remember Arun Jaitley ji, after Randeep ji's press conference, came out and said, I don't know why the opposition is being so worried. Now, if anyone was afraid of donating to the opposition, they can do so with full confidence that they will not be penalized. But the truth is, as we've seen, very different. But let me give you an example very quickly. Quid pro quo. Suppose, hypothetically, there is a minister in this government who is to be bribed for doing a particular task. The work is done, the guy buys electoral bonds, puts it in the party's account. You have no record because the income tax has been amended. You have to maintain no records. As Sir pointed out, the Companies Act has been amended. You can create a shell company, pay the money, wind up the company. No records are required to be kept. So therefore, it is not just one of the worst possible electoral funding systems in India, but in the entire world, there's no comparable example.
Okay, so you are in favor of scrapping it altogether.
Absolutely.
I want to get Mr. Naveen Chawla in here. And Mr. Chawla, you just in fact brought out a book on the elections in India. And you quoted as saying that the electoral bond scheme has actually emerged as a greater method of camouflage when it comes to the use of black money in politics. And I think that's the point that Mr. Jagdeep Chokar of the ADR was also trying to make. Just tell us, Mr. Chawla, why this does a disservice to the cause of transparency in political funding.
Well, let me give you a total picture. It was estimated by the Center for Media Studies, for example, and other bodies as well, that the 2014 election cost close to $4 billion of spending. It's guesstimated that this election will cost more. Now, there's only a thin slice that would come in eventually from electoral bonds. And I do agree with the earlier speakers that have just come in that there is very little transparency. There must be sunlight. There must be transparency. Why should there not be transparency regarding electoral bonds or any other form of funding? And while that's going on, anyone who wishes to make cash donations of less than 20,000 rupees has the full impunity to do so, and there's no disclosure. So we have no transparency in spending, no transparency in receiving, and no transparency in political parties receiving funding. So it really is a very sorry state of affairs in India insofar as spending is concerned and statutory limits being violated is concerned.
Do you think that the onus should actually be now put on political parties to disclose where their money is coming from? I mean, it's so idealistic of us to want political parties to do that, Mr. Chawla. But is there a way to sort of put that kind of moral pressure on them to say, why don't you take the lead, and if you're so transparent, then tell people who's giving you money?
You know, I have, Nidhi, come to the sad conclusion over these years that the political parties are not going to take a lead. None of them have ever shown any initiative in this regard, except when they happen to be in opposition. When they're in government, it's a different yardstick altogether. And if anything has to come, it is, for example, there is a plethora of suggestions made by the Election Commission over 25 years to the governments of the day, hardly any of which, as far as funding is concerned or raising funds, have been acted on. Whatever reforms have come between the Election Commission, PILs, and the Supreme Court. So for me to expect political parties, candidates, or the government of the day to come forward, I'd like to see that day.
Well, exactly. Mr. Chokar, the thing is that 54%, for instance, of the BJP's income is from unknown sources. 60% of the Congress's income is from unknown sources. 66% of the NCP's income is from unknown sources. I mean, this is across the board. When we say unknown sources, does it mean that they don't know either, where this money is coming from?
Before I answer that question, I would like to comment on what you asked,
Well,
Mr. Chawla.
money flows into parties.
What can be done?
Party coffers.
This question is to Mr. Jagdeep Chokar. Yes, Mr. Chokar.
I want to first comment on what you had asked Mr. Chawla about what can be done. What can be done is to make political parties transparent under law. And we did exactly that. We went to the Central Information Commission, and Central Information Commission, which is the highest statutory body in the land for implementation of the Right to Information Act, said after looking at data collected over 2 years that 6 national political parties were indeed public authorities under the RTI Act, and they should respond to public requests for information under the RTI Act. None of the political parties, and I will recount which these are BJP, Congress, NCP, BSP, CPI and CPM. All 6 of them have blatantly refused to implement the directions of the Central Information Commission. They refuse to respond to notices of the CIC. The result is that we are again in the Supreme Court requesting the court to get the lawful final decision of the CIC implemented. Now, it is very nice for any party when they are in opposition to say they are all for transparency, but no political party in the country is willing to come under the RTI law.
Yeah, and that exposes
The political
their
parties are under the impression, that since their representatives sitting in the parliament make the law, they are not under any law. If they find any law uncomfortable, they will change it.
Well, I want to take that to the Congress here. That are you sitting on a sort of a pedestal here, preaching when, you know, as Mr. Chokar points out, there's a certain level of hypocrisy if you're not willing to open up the party of any party, and including yours, to right to information.
Okay. So first of all, again, don't judge us by the same yardstick that you judge the BJP, because the 2 safeguards that we spoke of at the very beginning, the 20,000 rupee limit and the limitation in the Companies Act that the company has to have profits for 3 years and it can only donate 7% of that. These restrictions and transparency measures came in under Congress governments. I respectfully disagree slightly with Chokar Saab, because on a legal principle, I don't see how you can qualify political bodies as public authorities. I'll give you an example, and perhaps Chokar Saab can elaborate. Membership of political party is voluntary. You can become a member, you can resign as a member. Anyone can, right? When they do become members, what is the extent to which they are amenable to the RTI? In fact, the language of the statute did not extend to that. And therefore, if I'm not mistaken, it went up in appeal and is currently sub judice. I am completely in favor, Chokar Saab, of transparency. My party has led the fight repeatedly. And the RTI, which you speak of, was a creation of my parties. It was an abdication of sovereignty by a government for the first time in the nation's history.
To your party?
No, of course. See, I'll tell you something. The logistics of it, please explain to me. I'm a member of the Congress party. Does the RTI then apply to me? There are several crore members of the Congress party. Does the RTI apply to all of them? So these are the questions that still remain to be grappled with. It's all very easy and romantic and seductive to say, RTI laga di humne political parties pe. So it's a good measure. I agree with you. But it needs more thought. You need to plan out the mechanics of it better. And that's why it's still in court.
That's why it's still in court. Well, you know, Naveen,
well, we can disagree on the principle.
Yeah, Mr. Naveen Chawla, then, you know, what is the way out? I mean, is there no way for citizens to have a right to know, you know, who political parties are getting money from? What is the way that this can, how does it work in other countries? Tell us. I mean, is there some country that we can emulate here?
Well, I can think of a lot of countries that we should not emulate, where I've been observer, but there are plenty of countries that we can emulate, and we can look all over Northern Europe, for example, and the United States and Canada as countries, Australia, New Zealand, that we can emulate. And I, because, you know, when I see the hypocrisy of the situation all around, people come to me privately and they have told me what the statutory limits are and how much they happen to have spent. Now, whether they were exaggerating or wanting to shock me, I don't know. But the reality that we all understood, and I think my understanding of what the attorney spoke in the Supreme Court not very long ago about spending, or actual spending, if that is any indication, then everything is in the breach. The spending limits are in the breach, and the way parties are collecting money is also not transparent. So how do we find a way out? So in my book I've argued that the only way, and this is nothing new that I'm saying, commission upon commission has sat down and opined that we might have some form of public funding. Now there are many models of public funding, but there has to be a will, and that will must emanate from Parliament, because that's the body that legislates. The Election Commission can suggest, the Supreme Court can look at a point of law, but where must the order emanate? It must emanate in Parliament, and that is where this is not happening. Otherwise,
Exactly.
I would
I think
have
that's
long ago suggested that we must have some form, and there are many models of excellent public funding. We must have one of them.
Yes, I have Mr. Bhaskar Ghosh of the BJP here. That Mr. Ghosh, how do you respond to this criticism, both by a former Chief Election Commissioner, both by Mr. Jagdeep Chokar here from the ADR, that the electoral bonds, for example, are complete opacity. They completely lack transparency. And the BJP was the biggest beneficiary of the electoral bond scheme in 2017-2018. They got about 95% of the electoral bonds worth over 210 crore rupees. We don't know who these people are who've donated money to your party. Why shouldn't we know?
All right. So I would like to answer this in two parts. What was happening before this? Before this, there is political donations, but there was absolutely no trailing of the political donations, because majority of the donations comes in cash money. Now, when we came in power, 2014, we have assured two things. Number one, there should be transparency in entire electoral process. There should be digitization into the electoral funding. We have only the first step we have been taken, that is electoral bonds, and these electoral bonds are issued from a specific banks, not by any other institutions, and each and every person who is going to buy the bonds is KYC compliant. Now, the moment you are KYC, so the purchaser of the bonds is identified and verified
To
by
the
the
bank
bank.
and to the government.
I am coming to the point. Now, the moment at least one agency knows that this is the identity of the person
Well, so
who
does
has
the
bought
entire
bonds.
government. The SBI
Now, the
reports to
bank
the
is
government.
answerable. The bank is answerable to Reserve Bank of India, controlled, and here in our provision also, we have made the government is answerable to the election commissioner or the election holding authorities. The moment any kind of complaint will come during the election process, at least one agency,
Why should it be anonymous, firstly?
it's not anonymous.
It is
When it is
anonymous.
KYC complaint, that means
Why shouldn't the public know who's donating to
yeah,
each
I am
party?
getting to the point. Now, the moment it is a digital transaction, so the trailing, our first objective
No,
was
I'm
trailing.
saying as a voter, as a citizen, I want to
I'm
know
coming.
who is donating
I
to
am
political.
coming to this point. This is to protect the individual donor from the wrath or hatred of maybe tomorrow some other party comes to power. They have a full knowledge that this party has funded me.
Okay, let me just take the two
This
points you're
party
making to
has
Mr.
not
Chokar
funded me.
first. No, one
Who
second.
will control the wrath?
Okay,
I'll
okay.
give an example.
No, one second. Mr. Chokar, can you just sort of comment on that point, that this argument that because it is all being routed through banks, that it's being routed through the KYC, it does make it more transparent, and that
trading
the
is possible.
identity of the people is being kept secret so that other parties don't sort of lash out at those who've donated to an opposition party. Mr. Chokar.
You see, first of all, if one agency, and that too a government controlled and government owned agency, knows some information, it can by no stretch of imagination be called transparency. Transparency means where people know what is happening, not one agency of the government knows.
Sir, bank is not
Let him
controlled by
finish.
the
Let him
government.
There is no question of this being an emergency, being transparency. Number two, the identity of the donor should be kept secret. Now, political parties maintain that they work in the public domain. वो जनता की सेवा करते हैं, they वो do public service. Now people who donate to them, why should it be done secretly? Any time there is something secret, there is something to worry about. As a matter of fact, the secrecy of the donor is actually a threat to national security. Where is the guarantee that some dubious foreign agency will not set up a company here and route money through that to a political party and therefore control the policies of the government of India?
Can I say something to him?
Mr. Ghosh, do you want to
Yeah,
answer?
Mr.
There is absolutely no transparency. We have been hearing these arguments for the last 2.5 years. There is no value to these arguments.
It is wrong. It is not right to say that they are not answerable. They are answerable to Election Commission. It is. Please go through the.
I will say what I feel like saying, sir. You cannot tell me what to say and what not to say.
Election Commission, who actually, this is electoral funding. This is not a normal funding. And second, the banks are not controlled by the government.
Please.
Banks are controlled and monitored by the Reserve Bank of India.
And there is no government influence on any of this.
No, but Reserve Bank of India
is also controlled by the government.
So don't say that.
I know this.
Control the chairman of the bank.
I will say
we don't
that
nominate the chairman of the bank.
Yeah, very quickly. I want to make a very quick point to all the panelists. There was this very great Supreme Court judge of the United States Supreme Court, Justice Louis Brandeis, and he would say that sunlight is the best disinfectant. It would have been very easy for the Congress party to not take a position on this, but we did. We have taken it repeatedly. Mr. Chokar will attest to the fact that I've done several debates with him on this issue and our position has never varied. I would also like to add that I don't understand. Ghosh Sahab sat here and patiently explained to us the mechanics behind the scheme. What is all of this for?
Mr.
Why
Khan,
have such a complicated
during
scheme?
your regime, please let
Sir,
us know.
please don't compare us to
Congress
you.
is very
You are
famous
a million
in
times better than you,
criticizing
sir.
us.
You have
What
taken this
you have
country
done in last
backwards.
70
You are
years.
corrupt
Mr. Ghosh,
in the way you have
can
dealt with
we
these
talk
electoral
about
bonds.
today's issue?
This is
I don't
organized
want to
loot
talk
and
about
legalized
Jawaharlal
plunder.
Nehru.
Mr. Khan is talking about that BJP has done this wrong, this wrong, this
Sir,
wrong.
I am simply asking
say
why this
electrical-
opaque system?
electoral reform
Who
was
does
not
this benefit
today's
other
issue.
than you?
Mr. Khan,
All right,
electoral
I'm out of
reform
time.
was not
Ashamed
today's
of
issue.
telling the people who
It
is
was
doing
All right,
it.
unfortunately,
You should be
unfortunately,
proud
I'll have
of
to
that
end this
because
here. But Mr. Chokar and Mr. Chawla, we would like to have you back on this. Hopefully, we'll hear something from the Supreme Court on this, maybe on the 2nd of April when they've listed this case again. Let's see what the court has to say. But this is an important issue that needs far more attention than it's currently getting in the national media. Thank you to all of you for joining us this evening.